Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to VLGA Connect, brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our weekly look at what's happening around the Victorian local government sector. What have we got for you today? Well, coming up, community safety issues have been in the news around the country, and especially recently in the city of Port Phillip. Its Mayor Louise Crawford joins me shortly to fill us in on how the council is dealing with those issues. And as the Whittlesea Commission of Inquiry gets underway, have you wondered how it will work? I certainly have. And Tony Raunic will be with us a bit later to talk about the process and the potential implications. But first up, let's get the latest Victorian Council news headlines. The local government minister, Nick Stakehouse, has appointed a municipal monitor to Hobsons Bay City Council this week. John Tanner AM, a former chair of administrators at Moira Shire and a previous administrator at Brimbank Council, has been tasked with supporting good governance processes and practices at the council. His appointment commences on the 2nd of June and will run through to the 31st of December. Some CEO appointments this week. Lucy Roffey, the former CEO of Central Goldfields Shire, has been appointed as the next CEO of Glen Iris City Council. She'll be taking over from Rebecca McKenzie in August. Ms Roffey has been working at Yarra City Council since last year as General Manager Corporate Services. And former Greater Shepparton CEO Peter Harriott has been appointed as Central Goldfields Council's new permanent Chief Executive. Mr Harriott is a 30-year veteran of local government, including 8 years at Greater Shepparton and 3 years as CEO of Wattle Range Council in South Australia. Last year, he served as municipal monitor at Bullock Shire Council. Check out the latest edition of the Local Government News Roundup podcast. Peter drops in for a chat with me on the Friday episode. Greater Geelong Council has voted to continue providing in-home community care services while adapting to new Commonwealth Government reforms that will replace existing programs with support at home from July. The decision came after pressure from MPs and unions to reject a proposed exit from the service, or at least defer the decision pending further discussions with federal department representatives. Indigo Shire Council has received Essential Services Commission approval for a rate cap variation for the upcoming financial year, but the council says the change will be revenue neutral and will result in no overall increase beyond the 3% rate cap. The approval is for the council to transfer an existing environmental management contribution charge into general rates. Swan Hill Rural City Council has announced the establishment of a community-driven housing trust to address regional housing shortages. The council will contribute 2 blocks of land valued at $230,000 in exchange for shares in the trust. Hume City has joined now with 33 other Victorian councils calling for a stop to the mandatory rollout of a separate glass-only bin service by July 2027. It says it shares the group's concerns about the $10 million cost to ratepayers and duplication of existing successful programs like the Container Deposit Scheme. Kingston Council has joined with more than 1,400 community members to raise serious concerns about proposed redevelopment plans for the former Kingswood Golf Course in Dingley Village. Issues of concern include a loss of trees, increased density, traffic congestion and infrastructure constraints. Moyne Shire Council is calling for drought to be reclassified as a natural disaster as the region's farmers face unprecedented challenges due to record low rainfall. The mayor there, Karen Foster, has invited the Victorian Premier to witness the crisis firsthand, where farmers are spending tens of thousands of dollars weekly on feed and water, with many being forced to sell their livestock. Mayor Foster will join us next week on VLGA Connect to talk about the situation there in Moyne. Hindmarsh and Yarriambiack Shire Councils are also seeking state government drought declaration status after being excluded from recent drought support funding announcements. And a Nudgee Reserve has been renamed by Bawbaw Shire Council in honour of a local heroine. The naming of Gladys Anderson Park recognises the assistant postmistress who bravely operated the town's telephone switchboard during the devastating 1939 Black Friday bushfires until she was forced to flee for her life. And that's the latest news from around the state here on VLGA Connect. Well, Port Phillip has been in the news of late, tackling some really complex community safety issues. You might have seen a bit of the media around this. I thought, let's get to the nub of this and get the real story from the Mayor of the city of Port Phillip, Louise Crawford. Louise, welcome to VLGA Connect.
Bruce, I'm very excited to be here, having been currently and still was the avid listener to the podcast. So I'm
Oh,
very excited
excellent.
to be a part.
Nice. So you're the one. Nice
I'm the one.
nice to finally meet you. No, thank you. That's great. You have put out for consultation a range of things in the community safety realm just this week or last week. Can you just take us back to what's the problem you're trying to solve here?
It's really interesting, having been on council for a while, to see what terms kind of the major issue is. And this term, it is really about community safety. That's what we're hearing from our locals. And I think it's true across many municipalities, but I think it looks slightly different depending on your municipality. In Port Phillip, we have some low-level crime on the streets. We have people sleeping rough, and sometimes they get conflated. So, and then we also have, we're in a general thing where some of our high streets don't have the number of shops or foot traffic that they once did. And so it's much more stark and much more obvious. And then, of course, there's a housing crisis. So if you bring them all together, there is a fear, particularly when there's larger groups of people sleeping rough together, that there can be criminal behaviour and antisocial behaviour that makes people fearful. And that's not all of the people. I'm not saying all people sleeping rough, but sometimes that can really have an impact if they're there for a period of time next to someone's house, shop or whatever. So it's grappling with, how do we help people sleeping rough get the support services they need in homes? And how do we deal with the antisocial behaviour, which is the real issue? There's a lot of people in Port Phillip who live here knowing that there's always been people who might have been down on their luck or vulnerable that live in this area and are very welcoming. But it seems to have tipped over into there's a lot more antisocial behaviour that people are not willing to put up with. And fair enough.
Yeah. And there's a fear, isn't there, which we see reactions to. I think you've had some marches in the streets, etc. Is how much of that is driving the way people perceive this issue, do you think?
Look, I do feel that, that march in particular was about more police for our area. And as you mentioned before talking, was that we're not the only municipality that's asking for more police, especially the visual presence on the street. I do think there's obviously a more concerned part of the community that is raising the issue, but I think there are genuine concerns as well as, but we have to balance it. It's not everyone feeling unsafe, but there are definite issues that we need to address.
Yeah. So let's be clear, you're not talking about fining people for being homeless. I think that was some of the sensational media angle on this, wasn't it?
Well, we took that off the table for going out to consultation. The reality was that under our previous laws, it could be an end result to fine someone. Not that it was a first step, and we have on occasion done it, very rarely, but it actually was a genuine consequence. But we've taken that off the table now, so it's definitely not about that. It's about trying to find solutions to a complicated problem.
Yeah. So what are you consulting on? What are the sorts of solutions that you're wanting people to have a say on?
Well, I just want to say we held a round table with Ian Gray, who is a magistrate who did an amazing job, and he met with service providers, police. He went out with our local laws officers. He walked the streets. He talked to residents, to traders groups. He did an incredible job. And so that's part of our broader community safety plan, and that's an input into it. So that's the bit we've gone out to consult on. We want to hear what people think about the recommendations, about how they think council can respond in terms of how to make the community safe. And then we're also consulting on a much more controversial proposition, a change to the local laws, which I will say that I voted against, but it is only consultation, and the majority of councillors felt that it was worth consulting on that concept with the community.
Right. So what was the basis of your concern for not wanting to support that going to consultation?
I just don't think it will deliver the outcome people are looking for. So the concept is that we would, if there was a particular hotspot, after doing a whole lot of steps like outreach with the police and that, we would designate an area unable to be slept in or camped in for a period of time to try and disperse, I guess, the encampments, which some people see as a particular problem.
Yeah.
My reality is a lot of the people we're dealing with have such complex needs. I don't know that saying you can't sleep here and putting a fence up will make any difference to one, when the community is actually telling us it's the antisocial behaviour, it's not so much the camping. So I just felt it moved into an area that I just don't think it will get the results. It's nice to say you can't sleep there, but if you're dealing with someone who has got complex needs, who is suffering from trauma, asking them to sleep somewhere else, I just couldn't see the result. However, a lot of councillors felt that it was worth consulting on in case it is a possible tool that we could use to address them. Really, can I just say this? Antisocial behaviour, mental health issues, homelessness, they're complex issues, but it's a collective issue that needs a collective response. And by that I mean service providers, state government, federal government, police. How do we help these people who are actually in a terrible situation?
Yeah. I was going to make that very point. Do you think your residents get that it's not just a council issue, that it does take a whole of society response to actually move the needle on these things?
I do think they do. I think that there are some that are much more feeling desperate. And I guess council is the first port of call that they can actually talk to us directly about. And I do think our role is a bit of that brokering, at bringing people together and looking at one of the key things that came from the roundtable was setting up a protocol so that there's a series of escalations and a series of how do we work together collectively to go and work with these people to try to get them into housing with support services so they don't feel like they need to gather on the streets. The other radical idea was a gathering place. So they're social beings just like everybody else, and they want to hang out with their friends or just colleagues or however they term them. And we don't really have anywhere other than the streets for them to hang out.
Yeah.
So what if there was a safe place that they could go and socialise, during the day? What if we provided something like that? So that's a concept that's out for consultation as well.
Some of what you're consulting on has actually come from a request from police, I understand, particularly the encampments issue. Tell us about the relationship with police and how you're approaching that.
Luckily, Port Phillip has always had a good relationship with the police. And I've sat in many meetings directly with them over the years, and we have often said, are there changes in local laws that you need from us to help manage various situations, not just this issue? And more recently, they have suggested that there is a change. However, it's very complicated to work out what will work and how do you do that with also looking at human rights charter, compassionate response. That's why the protocol is so important. Like the punitive or measure that we're considering would be the last resort. We want to do everything else first, and then if you had to designate an area, that would be hardly used, but only if necessary. But again, that's what officers still have to work through. Is it actually practical? Will it deliver the outcome that everyone wants? That there's a lot of thinking that has to happen between now any adoption. But that's why if you're out there and you're listening, please, if you live locally, even if you don't live locally, we'd love your contribution.
Well, as you say, they are complex issues. There's no real easy fixes to any of these. You mentioned earlier that you joined with, I think, another 6 councils in writing to the Police Minister looking for some more resourcing of policing. No response to that as yet?
No, not yet. I think we only sent it a couple of weeks ago, so hopefully soon.
Yeah, so you'd be obviously hoping for some sort of a meaningful response to that. It's had some media coverage.
Yeah, it has. Look, I think for us, having more police that could be out on the street with that neighbourhood policing model really would make a huge difference for our community.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that, there could be a positive response.
I wanted to ask you about media. You're a savvy and experienced media performer. Some of the way this has been presented in the media has been probably a little unhelpful. Maybe I'm being a bit too kind. Has that been a concern to you, how it's been portrayed?
Look, I think obviously media is all about, except for yourself, of course, and this podcast, is they are looking for the headline, how do you get in an attention economy, how do you get attention here? And I don't think we're very good in this country, or maybe anywhere, talking about complex issues. We like to revert it to something really simplistic, and this is really hard and complex and messy and not linear. And I don't know that we've ever totally solved this problem, but it does seem to be a peak moment. So how do we manage it right where we are at now? Yeah. So yes, I think if having more sophisticated conversations about lots of things would be more useful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I might be drawing a long bow, but it might also help with dealing with the online abuse, the misinformation, the incivility that so many people in the sector are dealing with at the moment.
Oh, Chris, it constantly worries me when you see the level of abuse or inappropriate language or the divisiveness
Mm,
directed at local government, both officers and councillors. Like, let's
yeah,
have the debate, let's debate the issues, but let's keep it away from that besmirching people.
yeah,
It's not kind. You know what I tell new councillors? Get off, don't read the local
yeah,
Facebook pages.
yeah, yeah.
It's not good for your mental health.
So true.
If
So
there's a
true.
real issue, there are other healthier ways to get in contact with you.
Yeah. Perhaps a conversation for
Mm.
some deeper thought another
Well,
time.
didn't you just have an amazing webinar on that issue last week?
We did. Were you there?
No, I had a council event that I had to do.
So I'm sure you'll be able to watch it back. But yes, we did. We had some terrific speakers and hundreds of people across the globe tuning in for this conversation about civility and how we return more civility to public discourse, basically.
It worries me.
Hmm.
It worries me, and I've got thicker skin than most, but I do worry for people who don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
No one in any job deserves that level of, as you say, abuse, but also the misinformation
Yeah.
that's making it harder too.
Indeed. Great to catch up, Louise. Thank you so much for your time and all the best with this process. I look forward to hearing how it finishes up in the end. Nothing happens quickly in local government, does it? So it'll be some time, I guess, before we see.
Yeah, may I see you next year? No, I don't. It's not going to be quite that long, but yes, I'd love to come back and let you know where it goes to.
Marvelous. Thank you. Appreciate your time and all the best.
Thank you for having me.
Great chat there with Louise Crawford, the Mayor of the City of Port Phillip. And I've got to say, Tony Raunic's joining me now. Tony, I'm just loving the opportunity through this show to talk with mayors from across the state and pleased to say that they're all very keen to come on when we ask them, which is nice.
Oh, who would want to on and talk with you, Chris? But yeah, well, I think it's a great forum to get their message out, and I know that this is a very well watched show, Chris. Well done to you and the VLGA, and I know across the sector, council laws and council staff and just council watchers
Yeah, yeah,
interested in the sector, tune in.
very true. How have you been? It's been a couple of weeks since we saw you.
Yeah, it's been busy. Plenty of action around the sector.
Mm,
Little bit of travel. Got out to Bayside Council this week and had a good chat with councillors and the exec team, along with representatives from IBAC and the LGI, which was a really good idea that the acting CEO had there, and I'm off to Golden Plains on Monday, doing a bit of induction training for the new mayor there.
right. I see they've just advertised for their new CEO. That's out in the market. Bit of CEO news around this week. Bit of municipal monitor. I know we're going to talk about commission inquiry just a sec, but municipal monitor news as well, Tony. You would have heard John Tanner's going to Hobson's Bay as a municipal monitor. So that governmental approach to proactive governance assistance continues.
Yeah, to be frank, Chris, I'm surprised this hasn't happened earlier. Whether it was John Tanner or someone else, but a monitor appointment at Hobson's Bay. I think that there were probably grounds for a monitor to be appointed 12, 18 months, maybe even
Yeah.
several years ago there, with some ongoing sort of functionality issues, I think, and I think it's well, I'd hail it as a good appointment eventually, and we hope that with the influence of the monitor and recommendations that will fall out of the monitor's report, that we see some improvements in governance and perhaps less dysfunction
Yeah.
at Hobson's Bay Council.
I spoke to Peter Herriot this morning on the local government news roundup for people who haven't caught up with that yet. He's going into Central Goldfields very soon as its new CEO, ex-Greater Shepparton, of course. But last year he did a monitor appointment at Bullocks Council. And not to repeat all of that, but something he did mention that I hadn't thought about, which I thought was great, was the municipal monitors. There's been a few of them now. They have an informal network. They get together and talk about how they approach the role and compare notes. I thought that was a good thing.
I think it's a great idea that there be some level of consistency in the approach, the way reports are laid out, for example, all that sort of stuff. But gee, Chris, wouldn't it be interesting to be a fly on the wall in that
Yes.
meeting?
That's really what I was thinking. Yes, it'd be very, very interesting conversation to be observing. All right, let's get to our main topic with this week, which was the Commission of Inquiry, which is underway at the City of Whittlesea. And we thought it might be useful to talk about how these commissions work. What's the process? It's a bit of an unknown thing to many people, but of course, you know a bit about it because you had some connection with the Moira Commission of Inquiry a few years back.
That's right. The Moira Commission was the one that was undertaken last term, the one commission of inquiry, and really the only commission's been conducted under the Local Government Act 2020 provisions. Um, yeah, and I represented the Moira Shire councillors there, and that was a commission that was set up in October of 2022, and there was a report in February of 2023. Um, these are interesting entities or beings, these commissions of inquiry, Chris.
And
They
and potentially very significant outcomes, as happened with Moira, the entire council dismissed for a period of what's going to be about 5.5 years, I think it works out.
Yes, yes. I thought it potentially even longer, and it's you're right. Have very. I mean, they have recommendation powers. Ultimately, it's the minister who acts, but they have very broad powers in the way they conduct their inquiries.
Mm.
Um, they obviously have an ability to interview councillors, key council staff, members of the community, receive written submissions, undertake community consultation sessions. That's certainly what occurred at Moira Shire. And in
Mm.
all, with that commission, I think they spoke to 150 people and received over 100 community submissions and over 5,000 evidentiary documents. But
Wow. Mm.
um, participating in that process was very interesting. They're not bound by, the rules of evidence or the ordinary procedures of courts of record, um, and sometimes they have their sessions in camera, closed
Right.
sessions, and other times they're open to the public. Um, and sometimes witnesses can be represented by lawyers with approval, as I represented those Moira councillors, but that requires approval of the commission. So it's
So what you're saying is the commission has a fairly wide remit to determine how it will function and what rules will apply. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That is right. And so it'll be interesting to see how this the Whittlesea Commission of Inquiry that's announced by the minister, as you say, in April of this year, and more recently, those commissioners have been appointed to very experienced
Yeah. Yeah.
auditors in Prue Digby and Jim Gifford, who of course have great experience in the sector more broadly.
So Tony, I guess a key thing here is what the minister has said at the outset as to the purpose of the commission. We can draw some inferences from his statement.
I think that's right. I think the language in the minister's announcement for the appointment of the commission is telling. It was that the commission was there to allow for a detailed examination of matters affecting good governance at council and any necessary legislative, regulatory, or other reform needed to address those issues that have occurred at council since the October 2024 election. So that,
And is that a different, is there anything different about that approach to what was said about the purpose of the Moira Commission, for
yeah,
example?
well, I think it's that second arm,
Right.
any necessary legislative and other reform. And that
Right.
suggests to me that perhaps there's already a turning of minds to the possibility that we do need legislative reform given what has occurred at Whittlesea since the election. And what is that? Well, the mayor at the time, Councillor Aidan McClendon, having lost seemingly the confidence of all his councillor colleagues, there was no mechanism for those councillor colleagues to remove him from office, to bring his mayoral term to an early end, despite an apparent, lack of confidence in him
Right.
amongst the other councillors.
So effectively, the minister's the only one who could have done that, and he did act in that way. But you're suggesting something that might come out of it is a mechanism for councils to be able to act in that way.
Yeah, some sort of absolute majority resolution, perhaps. That involves a debate in the chamber and a motion. Um, for that, it would be highly unusual, but for that circumstance where the mayor no longer has the support of the majority of councillors.
Right. And what can we infer from the timeline? Because I note that the commission is due to report back by September, and the suspension of now Mr. McClendon is, I think, due to run out in October.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting timeline, Chris. In that, as you say, prior to um, Mr. McClendon's suspension expiring and his ability to return to Whittlesea as a councillor, the minister will receive the report of the commissioners. So I guess there's a possibility that that report makes recommendations that relate directly to Mr. McClendon's ability to return to his councillor role in October, potential recommendations for longer suspension, other measures, or some measure to be put in place for his return. So that'll be, I think, very interesting that, it would appear that Mr. McClendon's return will be framed by, having the minister having already received some recommendations and considered, what are the appropriate steps to take
Yeah.
at that point.
And we should note that Mr. McClendon has said publicly that he intends to use this process to, I think the words were, shine a light on what he calls corrupt governance practices. So he will have the opportunity in some way to represent or be represented at the commission.
So one would think it's likely that he will receive approval to be legally represented because he's clearly there's a lot at stake for him.
Yeah.
He will certainly, regardless of whether he has legal representation or not, have an ability to provide written and verbal submissions. I would be quite certain the commissioners will want to question him as well and put matters to him. There's a process under the Local Government Act whereby if a commission of inquiry intends to make sort of adverse findings about an individual in their report, then that individual is to receive those findings in a draft form and have an opportunity to respond, and the commission has an obligation to consider that response before they finalise their report. But so there's a number of unknowns here, Chris. Will, for example, Councillor McClendon, let's describe him as that, will his evidence be received in a closed session, or will it be open? Will there be evidence received from, parties, aggrieved at his behaviour? Or his conduct? Will that be received in a closed session or an open session? And my sort of issue with some of these forums, and it's not just commissions of inquiry, it's, for example, IBAC hearings as well, is that there can be an inconsistency of approach where some individuals can have the benefit of a closed hearing and others, face an open hearing. And so, when one is questioned and in an open hearing, then some of that mud can stick.
Yeah.
And we saw some concerns around the Operation Sandon process and hearings where one member of Parliament, the Premier, was able to be interviewed in camera, in a closed hearing. Other members of Parliament and councillors at the City of Casey were in an open hearing, and there was some tragic events, of course, that fell out at Operation Sandon. I don't say they directly were a result of that process, but there was a suicide, etc. So, having some consistency, I think, is very important. And there's that balance between the public's right to know and public transparency versus, the sort of innocent till proven guilty type attitude that we ought to take to individuals, and the fact that we need to recognise sometimes that just being the subject of this sort of questioning in these open forums and media reports as a result can mean that there's damage to their reputation, even if ultimately there aren't adverse findings against them.
Well, we can assume there will be intense media interest in this, however it plays out. Is the Commission likely to take submissions from community members, from, let's say, council officers, perhaps, who have examples to present potentially?
I would think that's really likely. I would think that they in fact will call the CEO, potentially some other key officers, potentially even some of the the former monitors to give evidence.
Yeah.
Certainly, other councillors, I imagine, will be all. I think all the Whittlesea councillors will likely be called and interviewed by um, by the Commission, and likely be given the opportunity to put in their own individual submission. And there may well be an opportunity for members of the community to put in their submissions as well.
So I imagine we'll hear more about how that's going to operate, and probably in the not too distant future, given the timeline here. We're in May and the report is due in September. So they're going to have to move fairly quickly with this, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a big thing, Chris. There's a lot involved. Typically, the Commission will have the support of some agency of government. I know with the Moira Commission of Inquiry, the Victorian Government solicitor was there providing support and preparing materials and etc. And so there'll be, I imagine, that sort of occurring in the background. But yeah, it's important because this is also can be quite disruptive for the council involved.
Definitely. Yeah.
Members of staff being called in for hearings, it creates a lot of speculation across the organisation. And I can understand the necessity of having this, but the importance of the process being thorough but completed early, I think, is it allows that community and that organisation, Whittlesea Council, to move on.
Well, that's really interesting. Thanks you, Tony, for shining a light on how this inquiry is likely to work, and some risks and concerns that you've outlined there too, related to the likely approach that the commissioners will take. We'll wait with interest to hear more in the very near future. Thank you, as always, Tony, for your insights here on VLGA Connect.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Tony Raunic from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, our terrific sponsors here of VLGA Connect. Well, that just about brings us to the end of another edition of VLGA Connect. Before we go, I want to give you a quick plug for the upcoming VLGA Young Councillors Network event. This is the new support group for all Victorian councillors aged 40 years and under, so they can come together and share conversations, key learnings, observations, ideas. The first in-person networking event for the group is happening next Friday, the 6th of June. Now, registration for the network is free for councillors under 40 and from VLGA member councils. You can find out more about that by contacting the VLGA or head to the website. And we wish all of those participants well with this terrific new initiative from the VLGA, the Young Councillors Network. Thank you to my guests today, Louise Crawford, the Mayor of the City of Port Phillip, and Tony Raunic from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our terrific sponsors here at VLGA Connect. We hope you've got something out of today's episode. Lots more to come for you in future editions. I'll be back with more VLGA Connect next week. Bye for now.